Hey, it's Stacey, and in today's video I'm going to face my fears of chain piecing. If you've been following me for a while, you know that I am a little bit scared of them and I end up in a big pickle, but I've come up with a bulletproof method that is a no-fail way of doing it. So I'll show you how to do that, and to do it we'll be sewing 100 blocks together, making an Eye Spy quilt. And you can see it here. We've actually got 50 different children's fabrics. Now that's quite a lot, but it's really nice because there's so many different shapes and colors for kids to look for, as well as things like this cute koala. Now, like I said, 50 fabrics is a lot, but over on Etsy you can actually buy Eye Spy quilt packs to get you started, and I have some listed as well. I'll put a link down below. Or you might have different scrap fabric you could use, or perhaps you could get together with friends and swap your fabric to get a nice variety. But let me show you how to do this chain piecing with a fail-proof method. To make an Eye Spy quilt, you'll need 50 pieces of quilting cotton fabric that measure 5 inches by 5 inches. I'm using 50 different fabrics for this quilt. This is a lot of different fabrics, but don't forget you can get Eye Spy fabric packs on Etsy. You could also use doubles of some of the fabrics if you don't have enough different pieces. You will also need 1 yard of quilting cotton fabric for the background. In this video I will be showing you how to make the quilt top, but to finish your quilt off you will also need 2.5 yards of fabric for the backing, 3/8 of a yard of quilting cotton fabric for the binding and batting. The finished quilt will measure approximately 45 inches by 45 inches. To get our 50 pieces from our background fabric, first I cut my fabric into 5-inch strips, and then I subcut that into 5-inch pieces. So now we have our 2 piles of fabric, and the pieces measure 5 inches by 5 inches. I've got 50 of my different fabrics here, and then I've got 50 of my plain background pieces. And now's the fun part. Now we're going to lay them out how we'd like to sew them together. And what we're going to do is we're going to take one of our pattern pieces, then we're going to alternate it with a plain background piece, take a pattern piece, and so on. And we need to go 10 down. And then we'll go across. I'm not going 10 down because I don't have enough room. So the first one there would be plain background fabric again, patterned piece, plain background, and then patterned, plain, patterned. So just like that, we want to go 10 down, 10 across, and once you've got them all laid out, you might want to shuffle them around so you're happy with how they're laid out. You might find, like I've used a lot of my dark fabrics here, I might want to swap them out so my dark fabrics are placed evenly in the whole quilt top. So have fun with that, don't rush it, and then once you're happy we're going to put them into piles to sew them together. And I almost forgot, directional fabric gets me every time, but if you are using fabric that has a direction like these 2 pieces, just make sure they're facing in the direction that you'd like them to in your finished quilt. So now I've just laid out 3 of my columns because I don't have a very big working space. You might like to do this on your dining table or even on the floor, but I'm just going to show you how I'm going to arrange 3 columns and then I'll do the rest. So you can see I've got my pattern fabric, then my background fabric and so on, and I've created a neat effect here. So once you're happy with your layout, then we're going to number our columns so that we can put them in our piles and sew them together using the chain piecing technique. So I've got my number cards here, and you can find a free copy of these over on my website. I'll put a link down below. Or if you don't have access to a printer, you could just write numbers on post-it notes and pin them on. But what we're going to do is we're just going to take these number cards, and I've already pre-cut some, and we're going to pin them onto the columns so we're sewing them in the right order. So this is my column 1, so I'll take number 1 and I'll place it on top. This is column 2, I'll put that on 2, 3, and so on. And what I will do is just pin them in place, and that way we know we're sewing them in the right order when we're chain piecing them. So I have put my numbers facing the right way, so that's how we know we're going to sew the pieces of fabric in that direction. For example, if it was around that way, then we'd know to sew them in that direction. So we want the numbers facing us, and now all we're going to do is pick up this first piece from column 1 and place it on the second piece, Then we'll pick it up both pieces and place them on the third piece, and so on. Then I'll start again for column 2, taking that first piece, placing it on top of the next, and then so on until I've done this whole column. And then again for my third column. So now I've got my first 3 columns done. I'm going to carry on and do that so all 10 columns are numbered. So I finished laying out all my pieces and I got them all how I wanted them, and now I've got my 10 columns and they're all labelled and in piles 1 to 10. We're going to start off with pile number 1 and pile number 2. And remember, we want the number facing us because then we know we're going to be sewing the fabric facing in the right direction. So what I'm going to do is take the first piece of fabric on my pile 1 and then the first piece of fabric on my pile number 2. And then I'm going to place number 2 down onto piece number 1 and I'm going to sew it along this edge. So I'm just going to turn it around slightly and I'm going to line up the edges. So I'm going to line up the edges on the sides here and along the top. We want them all lined up beautifully, and then when we're happy, I am going to just pop a pin in just to keep it in place. Pins are optional, but they do help with accuracy. So now I'm going to be sewing with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. I've got my 1/4 inch foot on. Just use whatever guide you need to use to get that 1/4 inch. I'm stitching at stitch length 2 and I'm using glide thread. So what I'm going to do is just start sewing right at the very edge. And then I'm going to come right off the edge and I'm going to stitch a little bit just so we're not joining these pieces too closely together. Then I'm going to stop. I'm not cutting any threads. I'm then going to take the next piece in my pile 1, my next piece in my pile 2, face them right sides together. Actually, I'm going to turn that around so that little coffee mug or hot chocolate mug is facing the right way. And then I'm going to face them right sides together. We're sewing along the seam, remember, so I'm just going to turn it slightly, line up these edges, and when I'm happy, I'm going to pop a pin in and sew along, starting at that very edge until I get to this edge. So again, I'm coming right past it, the edge, so I've got a bit of space there. Then I'm going to take the next piece of my pile, taking the next piece in my second pile, placing them right sides together, checking these seams or these edges are all lined up nicely. And I'm just going to do exactly the same until I've sewn all these pieces together. Okay, so now this is the last 2 pieces that I sewed together, so I'm just going to come right off the edge and cut that thread, and now I'm just going to pull it back and find the top. Okay, so then I'm going to open that up and then I'm going to take my pile number 3 and place it right next door here, and then I'm just going to take number 3, face it right sides together and sew it along, and we know we're sewing it in the correct order because it's all been chain pieced together. So again, I'll just pop a pin in, lining up all those edges, and I'm just going to one by one sew all these pieces to what I've already sewn. Coming right off the edge again, then I'm going to open up my second piece. Now you might be thinking, oh, but what if it's twisted? Well, if I can see I'm now going to sew on my plain piece, which is correct because we're alternating, but if I close that up and flip it around and open it up, it's still in the right order, so don't worry that it's going to be twisted around and in the wrong order. So then I'll take the next piece, and then I'll carry on until I've sewn all 10 pieces in this column together. Okay, now I've come to the very end again. I'm going to cut the thread, and then I'm going to find the very top again. And now what I'm going to do is find number 4, my pile number 4, and I'm going to do exactly the same, and then I'm going to carry on until I've sewn all 10 columns together. So I'm just about to sew my last column on, and it is getting quite heavy. Just make sure it's not dragging, which makes it hard to sew nice straight 1/4 inch seams. And don't forget that when we put our number cards on, it was showing us the correct position to sew our fabric to the next piece we were sewing it to. So for example, you don't want it to slowly move around and turn, because then some of your pieces of fabric are not going to be sewn in the correct position. So just keep an eye on that and make sure that these squares don't move, because they're exactly how we want to sew them to each of our pieces. So now I'll just carry on and sew my last column on. So now we've chain pieced all our columns together. Doesn't that look cool? Let's move on to the next step. So now what we're going to do is just take our number cards and we're going to put them down on the rows, just because they're super helpful in telling us which way to press our seams. And if you do want to trim the chains now, which is optional, you can, and it will mean we know what order to sew our rows in. So I'm just going to take this first one and just turn it around, and then just pop that in, and then you can see the little arrow there is going down, so that means press your seams down. Then I'll take 2 and pop it at the top here, and that arrow is going up, meaning press the seams up. And then I'll just carry on until I've taken all the number cards and put them in number order along the side here for my rows. So now I've moved all my number cards onto the rows. Now it's time to decide whether you're going to keep your chains or trim them. Now I personally think it's easier to trim them at this stage. Makes it easier to press, and then it does make them easier to sew together. But some people like to keep the chains there, so this is entirely up to you. We do have our number cards, which means we're going to be able to sew our rows in the correct order. So I'm just going to come along and snip all the chains, being careful not to accidentally cut my fabric. Okay, so taking each of our columns, and then we're going to press the seams, and my number cards tell us which way to press the seams, so that our arrow's coming down, so we're going to press our seams down. So I'm just going to open it up and set the stitches, and like the name suggests, it just sets the stitches, making them stronger and help them lay flatter. Then I'll open it up and make sure those seams are going in the direction we need them to. So this one's going down. Finger pressing, we don't want any creases in here, and when I'm happy, pressing. And then I'll just come along and find the next seam and do exactly the same. Pressing it down. So now I'll just do this for all the seams, for all the columns. Okay, so I finished that first column, then I'll take the second one, I'll check which way the arrow's going, and that's the way I'll press the seams. And I'll continue on until I've pressed all 10 columns. So I've finished pressing all my seams, and I've got my rows here, 1, 2, 3, and that's how I'm going to sew them together. And this is how we pin them. We actually didn't pin them in the order 1, 2, 3. In that order, we actually pinned them backwards because we were just taking them from where they were and going down. So now what we're going to do is take row 1 and 2 and face them right sides together. and then we're going to nest these seams. And what that means is we've got a seam on this side, this row, and a seam on this row, and we're going to nest them together so they line up perfectly. You can see on this row, this fabric's pressed and coming around this way on the back, and this one's pressed and coming around this way on the back. So finding those two seams, we're going to butt them up together or push them up together as far as they can go, and that nests them perfectly. And what I like to do is just open it up like that to check it that it is lining up perfectly. And when I'm happy, what I can do is I can either put a pin in on either side. By the way, I've also lined up the edges along the top here. So we can either pop a pin in on either side of the seams, so you can see this pin has caught these seams, and on the back this pin has caught the seams on the back. Or you might prefer just to take a pin and go in on one side of the seam and come out on the other. So you can see I've caught that seam there, and on the back I've caught that seam there. Just whatever you find the easiest. Then all I'm going to do is find the next seam and do exactly the same. So I'm just feeling them, pushing them up against each other, opening it up to check they are lined up nicely. And just be gentle here because I can see that stitching is coming undone. We don't want to be too rough. And when we're happy, popping a pin in, again remembering these edges are all lined up nicely. And finding the next seam, and I'll carry on until I've nested all the seams. So now I've nested all the seams, I'm going to come back to the beginning and I'm going to line up these corners here. And I do just like to pop a pin in there, of course lining up these edges here. And then if you'd like to, you can also place a pin in the middle of each of the blocks, just making sure those edges are lined up really nicely. Now this is optional, but I think it does help with accuracy. And it really doesn't take too much time at all. Okay, and all I'm going to do now is sew along the edge with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. When I come up to the seams, I can feel that that seam under there is pushing towards me where it's actually pressed to go forward. So I am just going to stop, make sure my needle's down, lift up my foot and push that seam under so I know it's sitting really nicely, which will just help us get a much nicer, flatter quilt top when we're finished. Okay, so coming off the very edge, cutting my thread. And now if you'd like, you can open it up and check you're happy with how the seams have been nested. And that one's, well actually that one's a little bit off. That one there looks perfect. Now at this point, you could decide actually they're way off and I want to try again, so you just unpick and do them again. Or if you feel like I'm happy with them, I can live with it, then just carry on. And when children are doing I Spy with these quilts, I'm hoping that no one's going to say to them, find the seams that aren't matched up perfectly. So just do what you're most happy with. So now what I'm going to do is take my row 3, nest those seams and do exactly the same. So now I've finished sewing all my rows together, I am giving the whole quilt top a press. Now I press my seams all going down, it doesn't matter which way you press them. Then give the whole quilt top a good press and then trim any loose threads, and that includes on the back. Like for example, you can see this one here, I will trim that because I don't want that to be showing through potentially once I quilt my quilt. If you've enjoyed this video, please hit the like button. It just means the algorithm will share it with more people and I'd really appreciate it. So now we've finished our quilt top, now we need to finish off our quilt, and I've got my finished boys quilt here. All you need to do is baste it, quilt it, and I've done stitch in the ditch and then bind it. And if you're not sure how to do any of those steps, I'll put a link down in the description below with all the different videos showing you how. And if you've liked this video, you might like to check out my Irish chain quilt video. Thanks so much for joining me, and I'll see you in the next video.